Good evening once again, and welcome to the 2021 Governor Frank Licht Lecture at the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University, featuring former United States Senator Doug Jones. Welcome also to the many Brown students, faculty, alumni, and other interested citizens joining us virtually. I'm Richard Arenberg, visiting professor of the practice of political science and a senior fellow at the Watson Institute. I'm honored to serve this year as the interim director of the Taubman Center, which is a part of the Watson Institute. We're deeply grateful to the Licht family, whose generous support has made tonight's program possible. The Governor Frank Licht 38 lecture series was established in 1987 in memory of a son of Brown and a distinguished Rhode Island political leader. Governor Licht was the valedictorian of his Brown class in 1938 and later served as a trustee of the university. As a two-term governor of Rhode Island, from 1969 to 1973, he was known for his gutsy positions. In 1970, during the height of the Vietnam War, he demanded that President Nixon call the nation's governors together at the White House to hear the objections some of them had to the continued prosecution of the war. His principled stand almost cost him re-election. Governor Licht was also an eminent jurist, and the Frank Licht judicial complex is a testament to that fact. We're so fortunate to have with us tonight many members of the late governor's extended family, including a former student of mine here at Brown. And most especially, we're honored to have Governor Licht's widow, the former First Lady of Rhode Island, Dorothy Licht. The Taubman Center seeks to influence American politics and policy through scholarship, public opinion polling, conferences, workshops, academic research, internships, and a robust series of speakers drawn from experts, the media, academia, think tanks, and public officials. This year, we've been placing special emphasis on the 2020 national elections and the events which have followed as a new administration and the nation grapple with issues of the public health crisis, social justice, education, the economy, and the commitment to the rule of law, with a roster of outstanding speakers and programs. Past speakers have included then Senator Barack Obama, Democratic strategist Donna Brazile, and Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. Tonight, we're honored to have as our guest former U.S. Senator Doug Jones of Alabama. Senator Jones began his Senate career as staff counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee for Alabama Senator Howell Heflin after graduating from Cumberland School of Law at Samford University. In 1980, he became an assistant U.S. attorney in Birmingham, Alabama. He left government service in 1984 and was in the private practice of law in Birmingham. In 1997, Senator Jones was nominated as the U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama by President Bill Clinton and confirmed by a then Republican-led Senate. As U.S. attorney, Senator Jones successfully prosecuted for murder 2 Ku Klux Klansmen who bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963, killing 4 innocent young girls. In 2017, he won a special election, defeating Judge Roy Moore for the seat vacated by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions, making him the first Democrat to win a Senate seat from Alabama since 1992. The last Democrat elected to the Alabama seat who remained a Democrat was Senator Howell Heflin in 1990. Senator Jones's victory was accomplished in Ruby Red, Alabama, which Donald Trump carried by 28 percentage points in 2016 and 26 points this past November. During Jones's 3 years in the Senate, he was recognized as one of the most bipartisan senators and authored 23 bipartisan pieces of legislation that were signed into law. Former president of the American Enterprise Institute and leading conservative thinker Arthur Brooks once said of Senator Jones, quote, "Whether people agree or disagree with him on politics, he's shown an ability and a willingness to listen to people on the other side and refrain from treating people with contempt." His tenure was also marked by difficult, principled votes, which he cast against Supreme Court Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, and in favor of removing President Donald Trump from office during the first impeachment trial. He served as a member of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and the Committee on Aging. He also served on the Homeland Security Committee briefly for 1 year prior to joining the Senate Armed Services Committee. In his 2020 re-election race, Senator Jones received 200,000 more votes than when he won the seat 3 years earlier. In fact, he exceeded former President Barack Obama's 2008 record for the most votes for a statewide Democratic candidate in Alabama history. But despite a record Democratic turnout, he was defeated by former Auburn University football coach Tommy Tuberville. Currently, Senator Jones is a politics fellow at the Institute of Politics and Public Service at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy and is a regular commentator at CNN. My conversation with Senator Jones tonight will last approximately until 8 o'clock, after which we will take questions from the audience. You may enter questions through the Q&A function, which will be viewable to me. You may begin entering questions if you have them already, beginning now and throughout the program. Please keep them short and to the point. I'll convey as many of these questions to the senator as we have time for. This event is being recorded for later viewing, available on the Taubman Center website or the Watson Institute website. It is also being live streamed on YouTube. Now it's my very great honor to introduce to you former Senator Doug Jones. Welcome to Brown, Senator.
Rich, thanks very much. I'm very honored to be here with the Leach family, as well as the greater Birmingham Brown University family. It's a real honor. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. You've described yourself as occupying the radical middle. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I mean, it's an endangered species sometimes this time, and you have to take some positions that folks, even in your own party, don't particularly like. But it is one of those things where, I think it is the middle, quite frankly, is I think where things get done. I think that the Congress was set up, particularly the Senate was set up in a way that folks that have the more moderate voices are the ones that need to bring people from both sides of the aisle. I laughed and tell people all the time that, everybody said they wanted me to reach across the aisle, which I did, but I also had to reach inside the aisle every now and then and pull some folks over my way. So unfortunately, I think that those moderate voices are a little bit of an endangered species, even though it seems that the electorate wants people to work together. They really don't vote that way a lot. So, and they don't have a lot of choices to do that. So I think the radical middle ought to get a little bit more radical. And it seems that may be happening a little bit today.
You and I both arrived as staffers in the Senate in the same year. And so, as you well know, in those days, you could build a majority in the middle. and across the aisle, and that majority group in the middle could just say to the more extreme, the senators with the more extreme positions on the left and the right, look, we've got the votes.
Yeah, that's what I grew up in. That's what I wanted to see the Senate be when I was there. It's not. The Senate has often been described as the world's greatest deliberative body, but it's really not anymore. And it's because of the partisanship up there. Now, when I say partisanship, make no mistake, there's still a good bit of collegiality among senators and the staff. And we do talk and we work together. But you don't see it often because you've got C-SPAN and all you see are the Senate floor speeches, which are now mainly political speeches, and they're not debate like you and I were used to in those days, where senators would literally come to the floor and listen to the debates on these bills because they could be persuaded. And there was the art of persuasion there. You don't see that anymore. Everything is pretty much baked in, and the outcomes are generally there. But I'd love to see the Senate get back a little bit to that regular order, some more amendments, more debate on the floor, more debate in committees. We really didn't even really debate in committees. A lot of that goes on ahead of time. You still have a so-called markup, but again, everything is pretty much done by the time you get there. The majority leader controls the floor and everything. I wish we could move back a little ways. And I really think, and in those days, Rich, it wasn't just the moderate voices that they were able to bring people from the outer edges of their parties a little bit along, because the goal was the same. Everybody had the thing. And that's what I think people are missing today. Everybody needs to know that the two parties often have the same objectives: good healthcare, good education, good jobs, a strong American defense. It's just how you get there is the issue. And that's where the partisanship is created. But in those days, it was the objective that was the defining thing for everybody, and they figured out a way to do it.
Well, it's probably a little bit of Senate staff chauvinism, but I've always believed that the best senators are those who served as Senate staffers earlier in their career. You began as a staff counsel for Howell Heflin, as I mentioned, a great guy. How did that staff experience relate to your success as an effective senator?
I think it really was that foundation, because I saw, Senator Heflin had been the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court before coming to the Senate. So it was new to him. He had not been a state legislator, but a lawyer and a judge. And when he got to the Senate, he built a very, very good staff, and he relied on that staff. He really worked with that staff, gave them a lot of leeway, listened to his staff a lot. They knew where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do and what he needed to do. But he would listen to that staff. And that really instilled in me something, because I wanted to make sure that when I got there, I built the best and the brightest that I could absolutely find. And because the election in 2017 was so celebrated, we really had a great choice of staff members to choose from. But all of those staff they had experience. Those that didn't have experience were so smart, and they picked it up just like that. And from that, I had to rely on that. Even today, it is so different, I think, for senators today. The reliance on staff is even greater than it was in those days. And you want to make sure that they understand that the senator has got their back as much as they want to have the senator's back. And it's that mutual respect, I think, that is so important. And that's the way we ran our office. And I had some real rock stars. I'm very, very proud of the office. All those 20-something bills that you talked about, I couldn't have done any of those without an amazing staff on every one of those committees and on the other issues that we worked on for the people of Alabama.
You may have partially answered this already, but I wanted to dig a little deeper. For about the last, maybe 30 years or so, the Senate's been losing moderate members of each party, both by retirement out of frustration and by election losses in primaries and general elections. Even for this coming election in 2022, Senators Burr, Toomey, Blunt, Shelby, and Portman have all announced that they're retiring. While not exactly all moderates, they're not from among the more extreme members of their caucus either. Senator Portman said, quote, "It has gotten harder and harder to break through the partisan gridlock and make progress on substantive policy." So I wanted to ask you, do you feel as though the middle in the Senate has been hollowed out?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I mean, it is a continuing process. I mean, you only have to look at let's just go back to 2018 when you lost, Joe Donnelly in Indiana, you lost Heidi Heitkamp, you lost Clara McCaskill and Bill Nelson. We were able to retain Joe Manchin and John Tester. But we lost some really good, more moderate senators. Now, the House of Representatives, in fact, picked up moderate members in the 2018 election. But the Senate has become, I think it's a function of not only the polarization of the individual states, but also some of the gerrymandering that goes on with state legislatures. And that just kind of filters out to statewide elections. If you look right now, what you're seeing is that it's very difficult to win a state that the presidential candidate does not carry of your party. Very, very difficult. And I really think that that's unfortunate.
I think it was Susan Collins was the only one in this
that's right
election that turned that trick.
That's exactly right. Sherrod Brown did it in 2018. Tester did it. Because Trump had taken both of those states. But it's really difficult to do, and I think that that's really unfortunate because there is a place, I think, for both a Republican and a Democratic senator in a state, because there are a lot of things that you can do if you can work together a little bit. But certainly, right now, you only have to look at the way the caustic nature of some of the tweets and some of the social media to see that we've lost a lot of civility. And when you lose that kind of civility, moderates really have a tough time, because that's the strength of the moderate voices, of trying to talk to people and understand that there are people on the other side of an issue that believe the way they do, legitimately have concerns, and those concerns need to be addressed for their constituents. And finding a way to do that while at the same time representing a more progressive side is difficult, and it's becoming more and more difficult every day, especially when you've got folks really, I will just say, and there may a lot of people on this call that may disagree, but I think Donald Trump exacerbated that because he really drove a wedge, never, in my opinion, really tried to be bipartisan, and simply tried to continue to get people to fall in line and get his base whipped up to try to win the re-election in 2020. And I think that has set bipartisanship back a fair amount.
When you were talking about Senate pairs from the same state, it reminded me of Barry Goldwater once told his biographer that he raised money for Carl Hayden, the Democratic senior senator from his state, because he thought Hayden was so important for the state of Arizona.
Well,
you'd be hard pressed to find an example of that in the current Senate.
No, you won't find it like that in the current Senate at all. At best, you would find someone staying out of the race and not really getting involved. But you're certainly not going to see folks that really get engaged unless the candidate ends up really being pretty bad. And even then, like in the race I had, even Senator Shelby didn't endorse me in 2017. But he made a point of saying he was going to write in a candidate instead of Judge Roy Moore.
Yeah. Well, in a somewhat related question, progressive Democrats are pushing very hard for the elimination of the filibuster in the Senate. What's your feeling about what should be done?
Rich, I don't know. I think I ought to just turn the next 10, 15 minutes over to you and let you talk about that. You're the expert. You wrote the book on it. but it is a good question. It is a hot topic right now. It's a debate, I guess, that they come about just about every time you have a president and his party or her party controls the members of Congress. And it is a really hot topic right now. I will tell you that quite candidly that I am reluctant. Let me put it that way. I am very reluctant to remove the filibuster at this point, because I believe that there is a historical purpose behind the filibuster. Now, I grant and understand that it was abused by Southern segregationist senators, like some from Alabama, some from the Deep South, to block civil rights, to block other things, even back in the, in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, block things, that provisions in the GI Bill that would have had this, let Black veterans have the same benefits as white veterans. They blocked those kind of provisions, even in the GI Bill. So I understand that, and I see that. And I don't think that it has, the other side of the coin has been used against Democrats as much, but it has been. And my concern, though, is twofold. My concern about getting rid of it is the long term, because, Democrats have this window of about 2 years. And that is only going to be there for at least 2 years to have all, branches. Maybe if the 2022 elections go okay, fine. But we know in 2024, there's going to be another presidential election. We don't know how that will turn out. And at some point, maybe not 2024, but at some point, there will be a Republican-controlled presidency and a Republican-controlled Congress. And you can only look as for Democrats who are concerned about the state of the Trump judiciary over the last 4 years. You only have to go back and look. It was the Democrats who decided that they would remove the filibuster for judicial nominations for district court and circuit court nominees, thinking that it would survive for Supreme Court. And they just underestimated what Mitch McConnell would do. That was clear, especially after he withheld Merrick Garland, that as soon as they got an opportunity for a Supreme Court nominee, that filibuster was going to be gone. Now there's a problem, and Democrats are like, have their hair on fire almost about it, but they still want to change the filibuster. I'm really reluctant because of the long haul and the long-term ramifications for it. I truly believe that if anybody has a chance to bring Republican votes into a greater bill, a bigger bill for passage, it's Joe Biden. He couldn't do it on the COVID package, but I think that that's a little bit of a unique circumstances and something he ran on. Now, having said that, though, Rich, I will tell you candidly that I am moving in a different direction when it comes to Voting Rights Act and HR 1 or something very similar to HR 1. And the reason I say that is because we're in a very unique situation right now. It hasn't been since the Jim Crow days of old that we have seen such an assault on voting that we're seeing right now in some 43 states across this country. It is incredible. It is stunning what is going on right now. And it is clearly designed to suppress votes. It is clearly designed to make it more difficult rather than easier to vote. And it's happening so quick in every state, in 43 states across this country, that sometimes I'm beginning to believe that the Congress of the United States, if you can do it, you've got to be a backstop for some of the rights that are being taken away. And this is not just an assault on minority communities. This is an assault on democracy. This is something that's not just going to prevent Black and brown communities from voting. It's going to hurt rural Alabamians, white Alabamians from voting that don't have the transportation, that need the mail-in voting, that need some other things that they can do. And so because of this urgency, I'm beginning to move in a different direction with regard to the filibuster on that issue alone right now. And hopefully just the mere threat of doing that will get Republicans and folks in the Senate to come together and really start talking, because there's so much of HR 1 that I don't see how in the world anybody could oppose, because it's going to make it easier. Our goal should be to get as many people voting as possible and let the chips fall where they may. get as many people voting and compete for those votes, and not try to keep folks that you're afraid are going to vote against you away from voting. And so I'm struggling right now, Rich. I'm really struggling. You can tell. But I'm really moving on HR 1, not just because it's HR 1 and the good things it would do, but because I see it as the only way to get a backstop for the horrible things that I see going on around the country.
It's interesting as I listen to you talk about your position on the filibuster. It's right about exactly where I think the president is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I've known Joe a long time, and he's worked with the Senate. He's a Senate institutionalist. He's in the Senate 40 years or so. And I don't think he wants to do anything with the filibuster. I do think he wants to talk to people to try to craft this legislation. He just, there was just not sufficient time for the COVID package when Republicans decided to just block everything. Remember, Democrats have been trying to get that package done since like in May of last year or something similar, and they couldn't do it. But I think Biden really would like to see his colleagues, many of which were in the Senate when he was there, not as many as he would like. I think he'd like to give it a try. But if any of them can come over and start working on some of these bigger issues, and they could tackle some really monumental things. Donald Trump had an opportunity to do that, and he refused to do it. He did not try to really reach across the aisle. He spent his time dividing people and threatening people more than anything else.
Well, my students are probably tired of hearing me brag about it, but in 2012, when my filibuster book came out, I got a handwritten note, "Dear Rich," signed Joe, from the then vice president, and he said this book should be required reading for all senators.
Right.
So I have a pretty good feeling about where he is on this, but I think he may very well be feeling exactly the kind of struggle that you're wrestling with right now that you described so well.
Yeah, I just, if you can make a lot of other examples, but if certain things in our democracy are under siege, if there are certain things that you have to do, I'll give you a great example. Last year, the COVID package passed with really fast, overwhelming bipartisan support. What would have happened if we couldn't have got that overwhelming bipartisan support? Would the Republicans have tried to do something? Let's assume that Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, but you'd had a House of Representatives. They would have likely have done something. I think that they would have believed at the time that their version of the COVID package was so important for America that they would likely have tried to do something under that kind of threat that we had. Well, I know you can't compare voting rights and a healthcare crisis that's cost over 500,000 people their lives. But it's damn close to a crisis in this country when you see the kind of legislation that's being proposed by 43 states right now that is going to depress the vote just at a time when we were causing the number of people to vote to go up. It's unconscionable.
That COVID bill that you mentioned, the first COVID bill, also illustrates one of the positive aspects of the filibuster that often doesn't get the attention. And that's not the use of the filibuster, that's the threat of the use of the filibuster.
That's right.
Because as you will very well know, Mitch McConnell wanted to bring a bill to the floor written entirely by Republicans with a big slush fund in it for the Trump administration. And Democrats just said, no way, we'll filibuster it if you bring it to the floor. And that led ultimately to negotiation, which is part of the long history of the use of the filibuster that often doesn't get mentioned. Let me ask you kind of a related question. Lots of liberals are angry at Joe Manchin. That doesn't make any sense in my judgment. He represents a state Biden lost by 39 points, yet he's on the Democrats' team and wants to see President Biden succeed. Now, 2 years ago, Manchin received 50% of the vote in West Virginia. Biden in November got less than 30% of the vote in West Virginia. As a senator representing bright red Alabama, were you in a similar place?
Oh, look, I was in a tough spot. There's no question. I mean, my race was going to be very difficult. Joe was fortunate that he didn't have Donald Trump on the ballot like I did. I mean,
Right.
that accounted for a great deal of votes in my race. There's no question about that. But I really kind of wish people would would see folks like Joe for what he really brings to the table in the Democratic caucus. And it's that hollowed out middle that you talked about earlier, Rich. It's an important voice. The voices of the more liberal and the left are important for the party as well, but they're not the only voices. They represent a constituency, but so does Joe. And there's others that have done that. And I think to really demand that any politician be what I call a checklist, I think it's just really unfortunate. Talk to them, persuade them. That's the way to get folks. Joe Manchin's one of my best friends, and I can tell you he listens to people. He listens to everybody, but he also listens to his folks back home, and he listens to his conscience. And that's the other thing that folks don't realize about some of the I think more moderate members. It's not that they're trying to play politics. It's just that that's how they were brought up. It's how they believe. And they've got reservations about some of this. But I think that folks in the party could do well by listening to Joe. There is the old Rolling Stones song, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. And Joe Manchin was there on this COVID package at the end of the day. And I think the people of America got what they need because Joe was able to work with them on a couple of provisions that he had some, in his view, in his state, legitimate concerns about.
How great a role did your vote to convict former President Trump in the first impeachment trial and/or your vote against confirming Brett Kavanaugh play in your reelection defeat?
I think they played fairly outsized roles. We were hoping that was not going to be the case. But, clearly with Donald Trump has a strong following in Alabama, that was used against me. There was some crazy stuff said too, that was just outright nutso lies, but it's hard to prove a negative sometimes in politics. But I didn't run away from those votes against Kavanaugh. I didn't run away from my impeachment vote. They were reasoned votes and they were votes of conscience. And that's why I went to the United States Senate. That's what I learned from Senator Howell Heflin. It's what you learned from folks like Carl Levin and George Mitchell, that votes of conscience really mean something. And it was, I told my staff when I got up there, I told them in the 2017 campaign, the campaign staff, and I told them when I got to the Senate, they're going to be easy votes for us to take. They're going to be hard votes for us to take, but every one of them, I want to research. I want to do the work. We'll argue it. We'll go back and forth on it. And I want you to give me your best recommendations, but do not ever give me a recommendations based on the political consequences that might follow, good or bad. Just tell me the facts and let's talk about it. And that's the way we operated. And at the end of the day, we spent a lot of time on all of those votes. Now I'll be candid with you. I did not spend as much time on Justice Amy Coney Barrett's vote because I believe that whole process was flawed. I think it was something that I just did not want to participate in, did not feel it was appropriate the way that was done in light of the Merrick Garland situation just a few years earlier. But with Justice Kavanaugh's nomination, with the impeachment, we spent an incredible amount of time. Rich, I'm I'm a trial lawyer by trade, and that impeachment trial, man, I was writing notes. I think I ended up with over 400 pages of notes that I wrote just during the trial itself, highlighting the things that I thought were important, starring those, and then talking to my staff about them, ultimately coming to the conclusion of conviction on both counts. But they clearly, we knew at the time, but they clearly played an outsized role, probably a greater role than what I had thought that they might at the time, but I would not have changed anything.
Sure. Do you feel that you ultimately got a fair shake from the DSCC in the campaign? After all, they did use your campaign to raise funds.
Yeah, look, I've got some, I've been able to air some grievances with the DSCC. Let me just put it that way. I will say this, though, about my colleagues in the Democratic caucus, including my great friends from Rhode Island, Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse. Everybody in that caucus was just unbelievable, helping me raise money, doing different things, zooming in, zooming out, doing all manner of great things for me. I really think, quite frankly, and I've said this is the one thing that I don't mind criticizing the DSCC about, is that I feel like a lot of times both the Democratic senatorial campaign as well as the congressional campaign, they don't do enough in states that they're trying to cultivate, and they look for the great candidate. They find a candidate and they push a candidate even during primaries, which I don't think is a good idea. But the way I talk to folks, I said, you've got to spend time in Alabama, other than just in an election time, to try to get folks thinking about it, because the brand of a Democrat sometimes in some of these states is really toxic. There's no question about that. And we've got to spend time. I think Jamie Harrison, as the new DNC chair from South Carolina, he gets it. He understands that. He's going to have a 50-state strategy. And that's going to help the DSCC. It'll help the DCCC. But that's how you win the elections. And so I don't think there has been enough of that. And I worry that even going into 2022, they're trying to pick and choose the winners in certain primaries. And I think that's troubling. They need to be working in these states. They need to be making sure right now, for instance, that Raphael Warnock and Mark Kelly are getting the support that they need, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, talking about the issues and talking about the things. And I think the president gets that. He's going down to Georgia this week to talk about that COVID package. He ran on it. Raphael Warnock ran on it, and they ought to be proud of it. So other than that, I've spent a fair amount of time talking to the DSCC about my race.
Well, when you mentioned about primaries, that not all that long ago, that was the iron rule, was that the campaign committee didn't get involved until the state party picked their nominee. Right.
No, and I think that ought to be the rule now. I really do. I mean, a state ought to be free, the electorate in that state, and ought to be free to do that. And you've seen times in the past where that got turned upside down. You saw people, in the Tea Party for Republicans, you saw people like Richard Lugar get, turned away in a primary. And that's unfortunate that would happen in a primary. But I really think that those are the exceptions to the rule. And generally the people in the state and that party picks the candidate that they best believe will represent the party going forward one way or another. And I really do believe that the DSCC, the DCCC, that's the route they ought to take.
Well, and during the campaign, as you were fighting the good fight, many Democrats were calling for the expansion of the Supreme Court, for example. What was your view about that? And did that issue cause problems for you in the re-election campaign?
Sure. All of those issues like that caused problems for me because you get painted with a broad brush. I was not in favor of that. That's the one area that I don't think I would ever change on, is expanding the Supreme Court beyond 9 people, just to get, look, Democrats let this happen. And we can't just start changing rules completely just because we don't like where things are right now. Things will change. And we need to be out there with voters and on our issues and making sure that those issues are today. So I was never going to support expanding the Supreme Court, but all of those issues hurt me. I got painted with the brush of defunding the police when neither Joe Biden or Doug Jones, who's a former prosecutor, ever talked about defunding the police. I did co-sponsor the George Floyd law enforcement reform bill that Senator Harris and Senator Booker, passed the House, and they introduced it in the Senate because I think there's some reform is needed. But I wasn't going to defund the police. I got accused of wanting to raise taxes in order to pay for taxpayer money to be used to fund late-term abortions. Crazy comments like that. I mean, so facts sometimes mean nothing and truth means nothing when you're in the middle of a political campaign. So yeah, all of the things from defunding the police to the Kavanaugh vote, impeachment, all of those things you get painted with a broad brush. And we tried very hard, and we worked really hard to try to overcome that with the really positive things that I did for the people of this state, brought home a lot of economic benefit to the state, worked very hard to give people their health care, those kind of things. But at the end of the day, folks vote in different ways for different reasons, and we couldn't overcome it. I like to think that if I'd have had a full term in 3 more years, we probably could have, but it's hard to say.
What about DC and Puerto Rico statehood?
Yeah, I think that would have been a little bit tough for me. The one thing that I am concerned about is, number one, I do think that Puerto Rico, because
I think your screen is freezing, Senator. Oh,
I
there
don't
you
know what's going on.
There you are.
Is
You're
that
coming back. Yes.
We are having a little bad weather here that could cause some of these issues. So I apologize, folks. So what we were talking about, Rich?
We were talking about DC and Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I think that's it's going to be a tough issue. It's going to be one of those issues that I really do believe it has become now simply an issue of whether or not you get 2 more Democratic senators, even though Puerto Rico has elected Republicans and Democrats. That issue never really came up in my campaign. It didn't, for whatever reason, between impeachment and the other things, it really never did come up. I think it's something that's important to consider. DC statehood, to me, is the one that's the most troubling, because you've got literally people right in the heart of America that have no representation in Congress. And I think that's very troubling. And I would probably have been more inclined to do at least DC statehood under the circumstances.
The trouble with counting those seats based on partisanship is, of course, the last 2 states to come into the Union came in as a pair, Alaska and Hawaii, because people expected Alaska to be Democratic and Hawaii to be Republican.
And it's just flipped. Yeah.
Well, Republicans have focused their efforts for decades now on transforming the federal courts. Over the past 4 years, these efforts have been wildly successful, as President Trump was able to place more than 200 new judges on the federal courts, and 53 of them on the powerful circuit courts, and of course 3 new Supreme Court justices. The focus has been on confirming judges who were selected for their allegiance to Republican goals and conservative ideology, and in many cases for their youth, so that they'll be on the court for a long time. Why have the Republicans been so laser focused successfully on their agenda of putting judges on the courts, and Democrats so much less?
That is a really great question that I wish I had an answer for. There was a time in the Obama administration in the first 2 years. Before the filibuster got busted, they had 60 votes or close to it. And yet they still didn't fill as many. But there just didn't seem to be the emphasis on the court system like they focused on healthcare and the Affordable Care Act. And for a long, long time, you're absolutely right. Republicans have played long ball on this. They've done it very methodically. It is their issue. They knew that the social issues that they are concerned about and run on are ultimately going to be Supreme Court issues and judiciary issues. And so that's what they focused on. And I am very disappointed that Democrats over the years did not seem to be able to put the same kind of emphasis and really push that. And it got to a point, though, after, Senator McConnell just continued. Once President Obama started pushing for his judges, Senator McConnell used the filibuster rule, the 60 vote margin, to delay. And that's what got Senator Reid so frustrated.
Sure.
That he felt like they could do it. And I will say this, I think that between the filibuster rule in those days, as well as the blue slip, and I don't know if folks know what the blue slip is, but a blue slip is senatorial courtesy that you have for judges within your own state. It's a Judiciary Committee rule. It's more of a courtesy, and you have what they call a blue slip. And if you have a nominee for the bench in your state, each senator has a blue slip that they can either return or not return. And if you don't return it, then that nominee doesn't even get a hearing. You can return it with a favorable recommendation. You can turn it with an unfavorable recommendation. But if you return it, they'll get a hearing and they'll get a vote. If you don't return it, you don't. And I will tell you, and it is a shame, but my experience has been that Republican senators really abused the blue slip process during the Obama administration beyond anything that I've seen. I voted on judges in Alabama that had been held for 3, 4, 5 years. And there was one in Wisconsin. I voted against this nominee as a protest. Senator Ron Johnson had held the blue slip on that vacancy for 7 years. And so we talk about the filibuster, but there's still blue slips for district court judges.
Sure.
Nobody's talking about that. They've done away with them for the circuit court. Republicans did that. And I would not be surprised to see Democrats say, okay, we're just going to get rid of the blue slips altogether and go. But Democrats, because they just now are seeing the importance of those nominations in response to the nominations that we saw over the last 4 years from President Trump, a lot of which I voted for, by the way. I mean, again, when you grow up with a senator who used to be a Supreme Court justice, you tend to defer to the presidential prerogative on nominations unless they are just so unqualified or there's something a problem. So I voted for a lot of them, but there were quite a few that I just could not. They just had no experience, no qualifications whatsoever to be a federal judge.
Well, and this is why we went through much of American history, just looking at Supreme Court justices, without the filibuster ever having been used, and in lots of instances for a long time, even roll call votes were not necessary.
That's right. That's exactly right. But certainly things started to change with the judiciary with the Bork nomination back in the 80s.
So traditionally, a president's party falters in his first midterm election. How do you see the prospect for Democrats in 22?
I feel a lot better about this. I really do. I think that number one, I really believe that Democrats need to have a message about what happened on January the 6th. And that is a very, very powerful message. We think that the voter suppression laws are an assault on democracy. That was an actual assault, physical assault on democracy. And we should never let folks forget that. We should never let folks forget that there were over 130 members of the United States Congress that voted for challenges that were absolutely absurd. There were 7 or 8 members of the United States Senate that did the same thing. And that's what caused that. I think the COVID package gives Democrats a real opportunity. Healthcare has always been on the ballot, at least in the last few years. It helped Democrats in 2018. It should help them again in 2022. What Joe Biden has done in his first 50 days, I think has been pretty remarkable, the way we've turned the corner on this vaccine distribution. Now, granted, Rich, I'm going to give the Trump administration some credit for helping develop that vaccine, but their rollout was not, if it wasn't going to be any better than what they did with the testing back in the day, we would still be struggling. But the Biden administration ran on the promise of economic and health help for the American people, and they delivered in record time, and they're going to continue to talk about that. I think there are challenges for us going forward, but with the resignations and open seats that we've got in the Senate, especially in a state like Pennsylvania, we've got potentially in Ohio, even though most of that state is, Republican office holders, there are some potential pickups. We've got to keep Mark Kelly in Arizona. We've got to keep Senator Warnock in Georgia. But I think there are real opportunities to hold what we've got and build on it. It's a razor thin margin in both houses, but I feel pretty good because I think Democrats need to stay the course on what those kitchen table issues mean. And that is, it's so important. And if they will stay focused on those issues, I think they can really do well in the 2022 elections and buck the trends that are out there.
How about the open seat in Alabama? Have you thought about running again?
Let's go to the next question. Okay. It's an interesting time in Alabama. We'll see. A lot of folks are kind of lining up on the other side of the aisle, including one of the members of Congress who helped incite the riot. So we'll see. You never say never, but I'm not making any plans at this point. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Good answer. As U.S. Attorney in Alabama, as I mentioned when introducing you, you famously successfully prosecuted 2 Ku Klux Klansmen for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963. Could you describe some of the challenges of getting this done after about 4 decades?
Yeah, it was a remarkable journey. That was not just a case to prepare and try. It was really a journey. It was a journey for me as someone who was 9 years old and living in a segregated town outside of Birmingham in 1963 when that bomb exploded. It was a journey for the community because that bombing really shook the world when those kids were killed just because of the color on their skin. My journey continued in law school when I cut classes to go watch the first of the cases tried. A lot of people forget that the first of the church bombers was prosecuted in 1977 by then Attorney General Bill Baxley, who's a great friend of mine. And I cut classes to go watch that, never dreaming that 24 years later, I'd be in the same courtroom trying to pick up where Bill left off. There were incredible challenges, as you can imagine, with age. You lose witnesses. Witnesses lose their memory, even though we didn't get an awful lot of help from any of the Klan members or their wives or anybody else that had what I believe to have firsthand knowledge about the case. The FBI did a remarkable job. You know, the FBI took a lot of grief during the J. Edgar Hoover days about Hoover's, to say Hoover was not a friend of the civil rights movement is an understatement. But the fact is, he put a lot of resources trying to get that church bombing case solved because he knew that the reputation of the Bureau was at stake. And because of those guys that really pounded the streets of Birmingham, they built a base for us to build on. And then things just had to line up just right. I mean, it was an amazing set of circumstances where things just fell together. Media that caused certain people to come to see news reports and go and talk about how Bobby Frank Cherry, who was one of the defendants we prosecuted, had admitted to the bombing over the years. Those kind of things you can work hard on a case, but those are the kind of things that you just have to depend on a higher power to help you with. It was a remarkable time. The most incredible thing that we did, I think, though, was we found an old tape recording. There were a lot of wiretaps and things out there. And there was one tape recording where one of the defendants, Tommy Blanton, admitted to his wife and one other person who was in the room about being a part of the group that bombed the church and making the bomb that weekend. And that really set us over the top in that. It was a remarkable time. It was a remarkable ending to an amazing journey for me personally as an Alabamian, as a lawyer. And it was a remarkable journey for this community to come full circle and to have that kind of healing that we needed. Not closure. I don't use that term because I never want to close the books on those kind of crimes, but it does bring us a good sense of healing.
Great story. I mean, it's a story that makes me want to just say thank you for your service.
You're very kind. Thank you very much.
We've talked about how important the COVID stimulus bill is, and we've talked a little bit about the Republicans' almost total opposition to it. No Republican voted for it in either house of Congress. Do you feel that the right choice was made to use the budget reconciliation process? There was a question, before the bill actually came to the floor. There was a big question about whether to make a real effort at trying to negotiate across the aisle, try to bring Republicans in. And then the decision was made to use the budget reconciliation process because it could succeed without any Republican votes. So you feel good about that? The timing of that decision is what I guess I'm asking about.
Yeah, I can't say that I feel good about it, but I think it was the right thing to do. I know that coming into this, that Joe Biden wanted to try to get folks on board. But at the end of the day, he was met with such opposition before he took office in the transition. Had Biden been able to, I think, have a better and smoother transition, a true peaceful transfer of power that started immediately, like every other administration has, that he could have gotten in there and had his folks out there, and he could have started working with members of Congress earlier to explain and see what was going on, it might have been a little bit different. But as it was, that transition was very, very difficult. They had to craft this legislation without the benefit of the government, what was going on in there. Even Operation Warp Speed, the folks running Operation Warp Speed were told not to cooperate. So it put them at a disadvantage for not getting all sides of the story. So at the time when he finally got inaugurated, when the transition started, he got inaugurated, I do think that there was efforts made, but it was pretty clear early on that Republicans really did not want to spend the money, that this was an issue of money. They, for whatever reason, there were things in that bill that Republicans had always opposed from the very beginning, like more aid to state and local governments. They'd opposed that consistently. And so I think at the end of the day, Joe Biden understood and knew that he ran on this issue. There was an urgency to this issue, and that he needed to get this passed. And he tried, but at the end of the day, when he couldn't do it, it was appropriate to do it under reconciliation. And just like, and folks often forget this, nobody complained on the other side of the aisle of doing the reconciliation to cut the taxes of the wealthiest people in America, to cut them drastically, to cut the corporate drastically, as opposed to a more moderate tax cut. They did that under reconciliation immediately in the first year of the Trump presidency. They tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act under reconciliation in the first year, and but for 3 Republicans, they would have done it. So this is not something that is new and unique. It was something that the Democrats had run on. It was something that overwhelmingly the people of America supported. And so I have no problem with them doing it the way they did.
Well, I'd love to keep on doing this, but we've got a large audience out there and the questions are piling up. So let's turn to a few audience questions.
Okay.
Philip asks, what states do you see becoming the new Georgia? That is, where Democrats can see victories in future elections. Would these gains be realized as a result of progressive efforts, more moderate centrist approaches, or a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. And I really believe that you're going to see a lot of gains in the South. I mean, things don't happen overnight. And that's the thing that people have to remember. Georgia did not change overnight. Georgia did not change simply because Stacey Abrams ran a great campaign in 2018. It changed because they had a 10-year plan that included having Michelle Nunn run for the Senate and Jason Carter run for governor in 2014, in which they did not win, but they got they built their base of votes that they kept. I think there are real opportunities in the South. Nobody ever dreamed, even against a candidate like Roy Moore, that a Democrat would win in Alabama. And we did. Granted, I lost, 3 years later, but that win right there sparked a lot of hope for a lot of people around the country, and particularly in the South. And it made a difference in Stacey's race. It made a difference in the race for governor in Florida. They didn't win those races, but they came very close. I mean, think about that, how close America came to having a Black female mayor of Georgia as governor, and a Black man as mayor, as governor of Florida. Mike Espy came real close in 2018 of winning a U.S. Senate seat. Beto came close of winning the seat in Texas. Jamie Harrison came close in 2020. So there's a lot of demographics that are changing in the South that I think are to the Democrats' advantage. But demographics changes alone are not going to win elections. You got to get out there and do the work. And that's one of the things that I think in the coming months, you're going to see Doug Jones and some others in the South really putting forth some things in the South to get folks thinking about where we are and what we're doing, and those kitchen table issues that we've been talking about. We're going to keep talking about it. It doesn't mean the South's going to turn blue anytime soon. May never turn blue, but you're going to see states going back and forth with some purplish tints, and that changes the whole dynamics a good bit. And younger voters are going to be very important to that. I believe younger voters tend to break Democratic anyway, but younger voters are still not voting in the numbers that they should be voting. That is the future of this country. Is a 25-year-old's got a heck of a lot more investment in the future of the country than somebody that's an older person, and they need to get out there and vote. And there's going to be a lot of efforts that way. So I really think, but I do believe it's a combination of progressive values and progressive means, but also you got to recognize those areas and where people are coming from and find that common ground. And when you find that common ground, you can win elections.
Janice asks, would like you to address the January 6th event and your reaction to it.
I did everything but cry. That was difficult to watch. It was really difficult. And then I say it was difficult to watch. I'm gonna be candid with you. I was watching a little bit on my phone. That was the morning I learned that I was not going to be in the administration, and I decided to go deer hunting. And y'all rest assured there were no deer injured in that outing that day. So rest assured. But just to watch what I could on my phone, it just was heartbreaking. It was frightening. I saw colleagues and my friends up there running for cover in the Senate chamber. That to me is just a sacred place. I've seen the videos and I've watched these people rifling through these desks that the Senate pages and others wouldn't even let my wife touch when she got on the floor one time. And they're going through and I'm thinking, where is my desk now? Where's my desk that was used in the name of John Kennedy and Harry Truman, right, and Doug Jones were inscribed in it? Yeah. Where is it and what's happening to it? It was just, I was stunned. I was appalled. I think there are a lot of people that need to go to prison for a long time on that. We need to get to the bottom of what happened and why. And what I worry about is that right now we're going to see a pullback from the Republican side of the aisle, who do not really want to examine what happened and why on January 6th. You notice that the talk of an independent commission has died down. Yes. And it's died down because folks on the other side of the aisle are afraid of what it's going to show. And that's just that simple, folks. I mean, that's just a fact that they're worried about it. And I can't blame them. But that was a serious, serious matter. It was not just for the lack of security, but for the whole way it was breached and the dog whistle politics that I saw and heard coming from the President of the United States that I believe incited that whole insurrection.
Yeah, I had much the same kind of visceral reaction that you described, having worked in that building for 34 years, and my wife and I were married in the Capitol building.
Oh wow!
And so it felt like a very personal invasion, as well as
absolutely
the symbolism, the national symbolism that you're talking about.
And when I went up we went up for the inaugural, and to go through the Senate buildings itself. First of all, going through to have to go across the street like I would walk every day when I'd walk outside to go by the Supreme Court, and have to go through a 6 foot, 7 foot tall gate with barbed wire on it, with state, guardsmen lining the streets. When I walked through the Dirksen building and the Hart building and have to step over sleeping National Guardsmen, it was awful. It is sad that we're to that point. And we've got to figure out a way to get beyond that. And we got to figure out a way to talk to each other, and that something like that can never, ever happen again.
Alexander asks, what are your thoughts on the public provision of health care? How have your thoughts evolved over your career and since the passage of the ACA?
Well, first of all, my involvement in healthcare has really been in the last, after the passage of the ACA, when I've helped focus on it in Alabama, and then when I ran for office. I have always, in my public life, been for a public option for healthcare, not Medicare for all, because I think there too many people have really fought hard, especially unions, for the healthcare that they have bargained for. I think some people like their private health insurance, but I also have been a vocal proponent for expanding Medicaid. Alabama did not expand Medicaid. We've lost billions of dollars because of it. Some 300,000 to 400,000 Alabamians do not have good health care because Alabama refused, for political reasons primarily. So I've been a real proponent on expanding Medicaid and a public option. And I'm hoping that the Biden administration, with some folks, now that we know that the ACA is here to stay, the Supreme Court has made that clear, that they can work with folks to try to get some expansion of healthcare, either by Medicaid expansion, like is in this COVID package, or with some type of public option. I think we're going to have that in order to get people the kind of healthcare. And I think in the long run, that will save federal dollars.
Noah asks a question which uh, is related to something we were talking about just a little while ago, but he wants to know, wants to ask about the Senate as an institution. The American Recovery Act was promised to be a bipartisan effort, but instead we saw a strict party line budget reconciliation. Are there any creative solutions that we're overlooking to restoring the Senate to full working order?
Well, let me make a couple of comments. Number one, I think we have to look at that package as a bipartisan package, even though it didn't get bipartisan votes. I think every survey, every poll that you see across America shows that it has overwhelming support of the American people. Both Republicans support it, Democrats overwhelmingly, Republicans to a lesser extent, but it still enjoys incredible support. And I think that also, that's across the board. Every poll shows that. And I think that gave the administration and Democrats in the Senate the cover to use the budget reconciliation if they couldn't bring folks along. Now, I'm going to be honest about this too. I am afraid that there are not many other parliamentary tricks that you can use other than getting rid of the filibuster to try to actually move legislation. What it's going to take is some profiles and courage. What it's going to take is some folks standing up to leadership in both sides of the aisle and demanding it. And that's not what I'm seeing happen. I didn't see it with the Republicans. I'm not sure I'm going to see it with the Democrats, although the mere fact that you had a vote-a-rama with as many amendments as you saw in the COVID package, Senator McConnell would have never allowed that many amendments to take place. He just wouldn't have. At least Senator Schumer is taking a look at that, and I'm hoping they open this process. I really believe that if they would just put more bills on the floor to vote and let the American people see debate on the bills, not non-germane speeches that they give. That's the other thing about the filibuster, Rich, that when they changed the rule to allow non-germane speeches to be had during the time on the bill, it didn't matter anymore. And people lost that ability to see real debate. If they could move the Senate and the caucuses would move their leadership to have regular order and real debate and get rid of these non-germane political speeches on the legislation or nomination that's pending, you might be able to get more accomplished, but it's going to take a lot of political will, and I think a few profiles and courage to stand up and do it.
There are a lot of among those that would like to reform the filibuster. There's lots of talk about what's referred to as the talking filibuster. Yep. From my viewpoint, that's not really a reform. That's something that the majority leader could do tomorrow, if the will was there to say, well, okay, we're going to take this legislation and we're going to stay on it day and night for as long as it takes and try to put the public spotlight on those who are obstructing. It might be an interesting outcome. It's something to try.
I agree with you. I think that's right. As it stands right now, you've got a certain thing. You take the vote. If the filibuster fails, the bill is usually pulled and you go on to the next thing. They could just keep going.
I was still on the Senate staff way back. I think it was on a campaign finance reform bill. But when Robert Byrd was majority leader, he conducted 7 cloture votes on one piece of legislation. He just kept hammering away. Of course, he wasn't successful.
Right.
If he had been successful, we might see more of that, I suppose.
There's ways you can do it, but the bottom line, we both agree, there's got to be some political will there to do it and try it, even if you fail, because if you try it and fail, at the next time you may try it and succeed, and that's what it's going to take.
it's a testimony to how interested everyone is in this filibuster these days, that there are about a dozen questions in the queue here that are all asking in different ways. How can HR 1 pass with the current filibuster intact? What's the prospect of getting rid of it? Just question after question. So if nothing else, the interest is there.
Yeah, and I still believe, and we talked about this earlier, I still believe that there are a couple of things that you tweak to HR 1. A couple of poison pills. Public financing of a campaign is a non-starter for Republicans in the Senate. It's just a non-starter. Others have some concerns. You might can get it if you're just talking about voting and access to voting. Maybe there's a shot. That's just something that I think Senate Democrats are going to have to talk about in order to try to gauge that interest, because everybody understands, just like with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, just like with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, if you can get buy-in on both sides of the aisle, it makes the legislation so much stronger.
Of course, we do have on some sorts of legislation in the Senate what we refer to as a fast track process. We do it for trade deals. We do it for certain kinds of legislation, but of course, that process is established by statute,
Right.
and it might be difficult to get that statute passed, but if it's even-handed enough, fair enough, something that could be used by both sides of the aisle in the future, maybe there's a sliver of an opening there too.
Well, let's keep the glass half full when we're talking about it, Rich.
Yes. Okay. The second frequently asked question the question keeps coming up about whether Alabama might eventually be more competitive like Georgia. The economy seems to be improving. The state seems to have a growing Democratic Party, particularly among the young. I think you've pretty much addressed that, but I'll give you the opportunity to expand it a little if you'd like, because here's another thing that we've got about a half a dozen questions referring to that.
The Democratic Party, I think the word competitive is the key, not turning the state blue, but having the Democratic Party be competitive. And yes, I do think it's going to take us some time, but we have started that process in 2017. We have reformed the party. We've got our first African-American chair. We've expanded the state Democratic Executive Committee to include a lot more young people. We've got a changing demographic. It's slower than Georgia. But the other thing too, quite frankly, that I think helps us is that we have some folks in this state that are on the Republican side of the aisle that just act like fools. I mean, they just act like fools. Look what Congressman Brooks did. And he represents one of the Huntsville, which is one of the has the biggest growth. It's got Redstone Arsenal, it's NASA. But yet, look what he did as part of the January 6th insurrection. I think people are beginning to tire of that. And they're beginning to see that is not helping them. Senator Shelby is retiring. Senator Shelby has been so good for the people of this state. People just don't realize it, and they're going to realize it when he's gone. And I'm just being very candid about that. Richard and I have been friends for a long time. Democrats may not want me to say that, but he's been a really strong senator for the state in terms of the economy of this state and bringing jobs in, and he is going to be missed. And without him, it's going to open some real doors to folks that talk the same talk and the same language. The party is building. I feel very good about where we're going. I think we'll make strides in 2022 when we have our statewide elections up. We may not win a statewide election. I think we've got a real shot at winning them, but we dang sure have abilities to start to really close the gap here and make some strides. And when you can do that, that's where a state really starts to excel, I think, when you have a competitive two-party system. And I think we're on the way.
Thomas asks, how do Alabama state politicians get away with resisting expansion of Medicare, in particular since it's being so much easier with the recent bill to accept from a budgetary standpoint?
It's going to be interesting to see. The legislature is in session right now, and it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they reject it once again. They've been able to get away with it, quite frankly, because the damn legislature is so gerrymandered that they don't have to do anything except appease a small base of really hardcore voters who did not want to expand Medicaid because it was attached to this boogeyman called Obamacare. And they had no clue what the Affordable Care Act was, but they didn't like Obamacare. And there was a purely political reason for why that happened. And I'm going to tell you, if you look at the congressional districts in Alabama, you can see how gerrymandered our congressional districts are. The same is true for our state legislative districts. And I think gerrymandering is the biggest problem in American politics today. And if we don't get that fixed, we're going to continue to have these problems. But that's exactly why you didn't see enough people in the Alabama legislature take the money, the billions of dollars that we've lost, because it was a purely political issue, a partisan issue. It's exactly what then Governor Robert Bentley, who was facing re-election in 2014, told a group of Democrats that there was no way he was going to touch Obamacare, because the only way he loses re-election is if he gets beat in a primary from an attack on the right. That's a true story. And so it is a gerrymandered legislature that creates gerrymandered voting. I am hopeful, though. There's been a lot of talk about it over the years, especially with a Democratic senator who's been pushing it and had a bills pending that would give states the incentives. I am still a little bit hopeful now that they might try to do it with the new COVID package, even though all of our members of Congress, except one, Terry Sewell, the lone Democrat, voted against it. I'm still hopeful in working and talking to some folks in Montgomery that they might just do it with the package that passed with a 95% reimbursement for the next 2 years.
Shannon asks, what do you think of Trump being acquitted the second time?
Well, I would have voted to convict based on what I saw of the evidence. I was not surprised. I made a point of saying in an op-ed piece that I wrote for CNN that we may, if Trump is acquitted, we may as well just remove the impeachment clause from the Constitution, because in my view, other than bribery, that is the quintessential act that a president should be removed from office for or convicted of. And it was unfortunate that McConnell delayed the trial enough to where he allowed his members to hide behind what they believed there was a constitutional issue of that it wasn't appropriate to remove. I do think that was just a duck to avoid the facts. But even then, even with that, you had the most bipartisan impeachment conviction vote that the country has ever seen. And I applaud my colleagues on the other side of the aisle for standing up and doing the right thing in that. We will see how that goes forward with Donald Trump and what his involvement in both 2022 and 2024.
Broadening that out a little bit, how deeply should we be worried about domestic terrorism?
Very.
Do you worry about the government going too far, as with the Patriot Act?
No, I don't think they're going to do. They've got the tools that they need. They just haven't had the focus. They have got the tools that they need to try to do everything that they can to quelch domestic terrorism, whether it's on the right or the left. We just see it more coming from the right, despite what Ron Johnson likes to think from Wisconsin. It's clearly more white supremacists that we've got to worry about. But I think you have to look at domestic terrorism for what it is, domestic terrorism, not just left or right terrorism. And we've got the tools. We just have not had the focus. After 9/11, there was so much focus on the international front, and that was appropriate. I don't have any qualms about that. But we have let our guard down, and we have not monitored the rise of white supremacy, the rise of some of the things on the left, and we let our guard down. And now we're trying to catch up. And I think the tools are there, and I think that this administration, this FBI, this Justice Department, this Department of Homeland Security are going to put an emphasis on it. And it starts with those people who they can convict, arrest, indict, and convict from the January 6th insurrection.
This one will put you a little on the spot a little bit, but are you in the Cuomo should go camp or the let's wait for due process and the Attorney General's investigation camp?
That is a tough question, and I watched yesterday on the ABC show, I watched Chris Christie when asked that question. And Chris Christie said, I'm going to be consistent. He said, when Donald Trump was facing similar things, I said, these investigations are serious. Women need to be heard. The investigations need to play out. He's talked about Mueller. And he said, I'm going to be consistent now. I ran in 2017 and allegations were made against my opponent. I never called for him to pull out of the race. I never called for him not to be seated. I just basically said, this demands his attention. I believe the women, and those women should be heard. And I think to be somewhat consistent, that is the position I would take here. But I will say, as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, there is credibility to what I'm hearing from these allegations. And at some point, I think it's gonna rise to the level of whether or not the legislature in New York believes that it should rise to the level of impeachment. We had a similar situation in Alabama a few years ago. Governor Bentley, who I mentioned a minute ago, had his own issues. They were consensual, but he had some serious issues. He ultimately was impeached, or a recommendation of impeachment, and he resigned before that happened. There's a lot of investigations out there, and I think we're still a little bit early, but I respect the process, but also respect my colleagues who work with the governor all the time. And we've seen this happen before, where folks have lived, been able to survive it. Some have not. I'll let it play out.
Well, I don't know where all our time has gone, but I will try to squeeze one last question in. I always like to ask our distinguished guests who have had a lot of success in their careers, with a lot of Brown students in the audience. They're always interested to know how you got where you got to and what advice you might have for young Brown students who are interested in getting involved in the political arena.
I really do appreciate you asking that question. I'd always been interested in politics from an early age, and then through high school and college, and I was just, I wanted to hit the ground running. Thought I'd be governor before I was 30 years old. But then I realized that the interest in politics that I had was really about me, and it wasn't about public service. And, I was very fortunate to be with some really great mentors who, like Howell Heflin and some others, that really taught me that public office is public service. And if you look at it as just holding an office, you're not doing it justice. And if you look at it as public service, serving others, it's not about you, it's not about individuals, but it's about public service and doing good things for people and finding that common ground so that everybody can benefit, that rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think it, from there, it really would change dynamics. And I think it really helped me in my career, both as a lawyer, as U.S. attorney. It helped me get to the United States Senate. It helped me do some things in the United States Senate. And quite frankly, I'm not done. I may not run for office again, but I'm still there because there's unfinished business. And what I would tell folks, get engaged on things you care about. Don't get engaged just because you want to be somebody. Get engaged on the things you care about. Get engaged in your community. Understand that this is public service, but know this: you work hard, you keep your moral compass. You never know. I never dreamed when I was sitting in college that I would actually be in the United States Senate, that I would actually try a case as a lawyer that convicted 2 men of killing 4 young girls that meant so much to so many people. I wanted it, but I never dreamed it could really be possible. There's people on this call right now. There will be a U.S. Senator on this right now. There's going to be a member of Congress. There's going to be a governor, a lieutenant governor. But it's those that keep that moral compass and do it for the right reason, for public service. They're going to be the ones to succeed. So make it start happening as early as possible.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for really a wonderful presentation. I want to thank you on behalf of the Taubman Center and the Licht family. And I do hope we'll have an opportunity to invite you back again sometime, real live in person.
I do too, Rich. Thank you very much to everyone with Brown and the Licht family. It's been a real honor to be with you today.
Bye-bye.